My new book, Awake, Observe, Shape, Transform, is now available on Amazon, along with the 90-day transformation journal. You'll find a link to these things in the episode description. Also, if you'd like to support this work, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers with no locked content, just a way to say I value this. You can also visit the site and check out the growing merch store, shirts, tanks, hats, and learn about one-on-one sessions with me by clicking the About button. And don't forget, the YouTube page has the podcast and binaural beats for meditation, rest, and sleep. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we are continuing our theme of the suppression of knowledge and freedom with a woman from ancient history who, in my opinion, personified the death of the goddess. Today I want to talk to you about Hypatia of Alexandria. She was a brilliant Egyptian mathematician and astronomer. She was a philosopher, and she was, more importantly, a teacher at the famed Library of Alexandria. Now, it is not my intention to discuss her in the way she's typically discussed, which is in a brief, sanitized way, but today I want to talk about why she was murdered. And she was murdered horrifically by Christians. Because Hypatia's death wasn't a misunderstanding, and it wasn't an accident of chaos. It was the result of a very specific tension that shows up again and again throughout history. And that tension seems to rise when knowledge becomes threatening, when curiosity destabilizes authority, and when the power structures decide that truth is no longer useful unless it can be controlled. Now, tucked inside of her story is another one that we've heard forever, and that's the story of the Library of Alexandria. Who burned it, who destroyed humanity's greatest storehouse of knowledge, and more importantly, why are we so obsessed with that question? So let's do it. Hypatia of Alexandria, the murder of knowledge and the rise of religious dogma. This story it's infuriating. So I'll do my best not to digress too much, but if there was ever a topic that gets me riled up, it's stuff like this. So Hypatia lived in Alexandria during the late 4th, early 5th centuries, and she lived there when the city was still one of the intellectual capitals of the world. Hypatia was a mathematician. Her contributions spanned works in geometry and algebra. She was an astronomer. She taught models of planetary motion long before telescopes existed. She was a philosopher. She taught Neoplatonism, and if you listened to the Lucifer episode and the Goddess episode and you know what Neoplatonism is, then you already see why this is going to be a big fucking problem for Hypatia. Neoplatonism was a spiritual philosophy that believed that reality flows from one single divine source, and that the goal of human life is to return to that source through inner purification, contemplation, direct experience. In Neoplatonism, the divine, God, isn't a person who rules from above. It's the one, capital O, an infinite unity beyond form, beyond gender, beyond language. And from this one, this fountainhead, existence emanates outward. It begins as divine intelligence, and then it becomes the soul, and then finally as the material world. Neoplatonism sees the divine as both transcendent and present within everything, omnipresent like God. And right now you might be thinking, how is this a problem? Well, you'll see. The belief was that God isn't up there, right? Quote unquote, up there. God is the ground of being itself. God is the source of all. Again, where's the problem? Well, I'll tell you. Spiritual practice for the Neoplatonist wasn't about obedience or belief. It was about remembering. It was about turning inward and reuniting with the source. Knowledge of God comes through direct insight and not doctrine. And this framework absolutely influenced early Christian mysticism and eventually Western spirituality, but much of its experiential and relational aspect was eventually replaced by more rigid theological structures, which, if you've been following along, is what happens when the power structure finds a belief system that it cannot control. It has to create a control system. But what made Hypatia truly unusual wasn't just her intelligence or spiritual beliefs. It was her public presence. She taught openly in the city. She taught men as intellectual equals. She advised political leaders, and more importantly, she refused to convert to Christianity. And she did all of this advising and teaching without belonging to an institution that could control her. The world around her was rapidly reorganizing itself around religious authority, and that was deeply unsettling for her. Now, by Hypatia's lifetime, Christianity had undergone a radical transformation. It had gone from persecuted minority to state-backed authority. And as you know, being state-backed isn't exactly a marker for truth and reality. Under Emperor Theodosius, the first pagan practices were outlawed. And just so we're clear, the word pagan at the time meant country dweller, or a kind of person who lived in the woods. It was like a hillbilly. So temples were shut down. Traditional philosophical schools were increasingly viewed as suspicious or dangerous. Alexandria became very volatile. It was a cauldron of competing religious identities, political rivalries, power structures, ethnic tensions, and Christian leaders were consolidating influence. If you listened to the episode 228, then you know that when power gets consolidated and religion becomes a state-run institution, problems are coming. So the pagan traditions were being pushed to the margins, and philosophical inquiry, once the pride of the city, was now becoming a liability to the power structure. You can't have people freely exchanging ideas when the state has ideas too, right? What happens if someone has a better idea than the state? Now, Hypatia existed at the intersection of all this tension. She wasn't just a philosopher. She was a symbol of the old world that was refusing to disappear quietly. So in 415 CE, accusations began to circulate that Hypatia was being blamed for political unrest. She was blamed for influencing the city's governor, whatever that means. And they also said she was practicing sorcery, of course. And more importantly, she was obstructing Christian authority. Now, these accusations were never meant to be proven. Remember that. They were meant to justify her removal. It's the same playbook used by power structures of all sorts to this day. So one day, a Christian mob finds her in public. She was dragged into a church, and there, in a place supposedly dedicated to salvation and mercy, she was murdered. She was stripped, she was beaten and killed in public in an act of ritualized violence. While she was alive, this Christian mob skinned her with abalone shells. Those are clam shells, basically. And then they burned her alive. This wasn't some spontaneous moment of rage. It was performative violence. It was meant to send a message, not just to pagans, but to anyone who believed knowledge could exist outside of state-backed religious oversight. Hypatia didn't challenge Christianity by attacking it. You don't have to. She challenged it by making it completely unnecessary. And that is the greatest fear of all power structure: irrelevance. When a control system that is put in place by the power structure is shown to be irrelevant, that's when the people need to be on alert, because that's when hierarchy goes into overdrive, and that's when the dick-wagging contest of power starts. I mean, let's say, hypothetically, let's say that you're a very small country with billions of dollars worth of defense systems in place to defend against, rocket attacks. And let's say the leader of that very small country was being looked at for being a bit of a rascal. So all the citizens of that country were displeased with him and showing a lot of signs of fatigue with that leader. They wanted a new leader. Well, not that this would ever happen in the real world, but if that leader needed to hold on to power and show his relevance, he might allow something horrific to occur that would cause the murder and capture of his own people in order to manufacture a crisis that would showcase his relevance. Look what I did for all of you. I went after the bad guys. I'm a hero. Be the disease and the cure all at once. When power structures become irrelevant, that's when people need to be vigilant, because that's when control systems are put in place, especially religious ones. Remember that. Not to digress too far, but you get the picture. Also, I'll say this again. Wherever you think I stand politically, you're probably wrong. Unfortunately, my stance is rare. I can have compassion and I can have empathy and also completely disagree with you. Why? Because there is relative truth and there's absolute truth. Mistaking the two is avidya, which is the misperception that is at the center of all suffering. So Hypatia represented a few things. She represented wisdom without scripture. She represented ethics without being dogmatic. And she represented truth without a hierarchy being there to dispense the truth. Okay. She showed that meaning could be found through reason, contemplation, self-inquiry, and you could do it without submission to religious and political authority. And to the power structure, that's the most dangerous position of all, because the power structure requires dogma. In these systems, truth flows downward, and that defines reality. And as I laid out in the Lucifer episode, obedience becomes virtuous in the reality that is concocted by the power structure. Well, Hypatia inverted that structure. She flipped it on its head. She embodied the idea that truth emerges through inquiry, not decree. This is the point of Plato's dialectic. This is the purpose in the debates engaged in by Tibetan Buddhist monks. And this sort of free and open discussion makes centralized power very, very nervous. We saw it during 9/11. We saw it during COVID. After 9/11, if you asked certain questions or posed certain theories about the motivations of the government, you were considered unpatriotic. Then later, most, if not all, of those theories were found to be pretty accurate and were definitely questions that should have been asked immediately. Let's just say there's a lot of loose change floating around. During COVID, same thing. Turns out, should ask more questions. But if you did, your life would get ruined. So the big question, well, first, if you don't know what the Library of Alexandria was, if you've never heard of it, what the fuck? It's just disappointing, but also kind of par for the course. Why would you dig into it? Why would you care when you have to bust your ass to make ends meet? And maybe that's the plan, right? That you just keep them busy. But it was regarded as the largest storehouse of human knowledge that ever existed. And the popular narrative is that it got burned down in a fire. Some people blame Caesar. Some people blame Muslims. But the truth is, it is worse, in my opinion, because the reality is that it happened slowly over time. And just to jump out early with this one, Caliph Omar is often blamed, but the truth is, by the time there were the Muslim hordes invading, the library was barely there. So you can let that one go. But during a military conflict in Alexandria, Julius Caesar ordered ships burned in the harbor. Some accounts say that fire spread to nearby buildings, possibly damaging storage facilities that were holding ancient scrolls. So this wasn't like ideological, it wasn't religious, it was just good old-fashioned collateral damage. However, the library was an institution. it wasn't just some building. It required patronage, it required funding, political support. So as priorities shifted, the scholars left. There was no more money going into the library. And to continually draw on the theme of these episodes, as power centralized and religion became more about political power, thinking openly and speaking openly became unsafe, and intellectual life kind of went away. We think that knowledge dies dramatically, but it doesn't. It dies very quietly, and that should scare you. People become tired. They begin to just trust their surrogates, the politicians, the public figures, these people that are posing as authorities. Now, hearing that today, those of you with diehard dogmatic political leanings, which you will deny having, but you have them, you'll blame the other side. You'll hear what I'm saying and think, oh, that applies to those people. Sure, but they're saying the same thing about you, and you're both correct. You see, you both bought in. You don't like to think that you did, because every human being thinks that they're being rational and somehow above the dogmatic horseshit, but you're not. I realize that I'm being very broad here, but let's be honest. Equanimity that allows clear, reasonable thinking is a rare commodity. And I'm not saying this to be an asshole. I'm saying this because I really hope that if this broad statement applies to you, that you'll think about it, and at the very least, notice that it's a big thing that happens in the human mind. It's just one of those things. And more importantly, it's rooted in fear. Right? Anyway, back to the destruction of the largest storehouse of human knowledge in history. This is the most ideologically charged moment in this story. And it's true. I'm not trying to be inflammatory, but again, when a religion, any religion, becomes the seat of political power, these kind of things are going to happen. So, as power spread, Christian authorities destroyed the Serapeum. And the Serapeum housed all of the text and functioned as a successor institution to the Library of Alexandria. This destruction was not accidental. It was justified as a religious act, and it marked a turning point where philosophy became heresy by association. So those of you Christians that point to the ignorance of Islam when it comes to the destruction of ancient religious sites and temples, think back to when Christianity was just a little kid, just making its way as a scourge, freaking out, having tantrums, and destroying anything that didn't align with its own mythology. Okay? The other day I was listening to this guy, a Christian, and he debates Muslims. And I mean, he eviscerates them. He knows the Quran better than they do. It's pretty funny, but also it's so stupid that it hurts my head sometimes, because at some point, these two powerhouses of spiritual knowledge start to sound like dorks arguing over storylines in comic books. It was hilarious because the Christian fellow, whom I really do. I mean, I get it. He had an experience with this system and he feels strongly about it. But the problem is that he needs it to be objectively real. Okay. And that leads to these absolutely ridiculous arguments about who said what first. And to hear Abrahamic followers of whatever stripe talking like that, when there are thousands and thousands of years of Vedic literature and Buddhist Dharma that precedes all of it that said the same things, is absolutely hilarious. It's fucking hilarious. It's actually super depressing. And on top of that, the one guy saying that Jesus is the only way because a book with a super sketchy history said it in a language that requires actual study to understand the meaning and nuances, translating it into English. I'm talking about ancient Greek, not Hebrew, because the New Testament was written in ancient Greek, not Hebrew. And on top of that, these statements were made in a dead language, Aramaic, that I'm quite certain this fella doesn't understand or speak. And I'm certain the same thing goes for ancient Greek. He's not a classicist. He's not a philologist. He's a fucking preacher, barely a preacher. Fun fact, most seminaries are not requiring ancient Greek. Think about that. Why? Because it's freaking students out when they read the actual translations. It's bad for business. Anyway, it's so stupid. So I can't. It just drives me fucking crazy. And not to continually harp on this, but do a little research and find out how many words are in Hebrew and how many words were in ancient Greek. And you'll see why it's there were not as many words in Hebrew as there were in ancient Greek. There's like thousands and thousands more. So when you're talking about translating something, anyway, I'm not, look, believe something. I don't care what it is, but just you believe it, right? You don't need me. It's your thing. Anyway, so by Hypatia's lifetime, many of these books were already gone. But what remained was the tradition, which is just as important. The spirit of inquiry, the willingness to question, the belief that knowledge belongs to humanity, not institutions. But Hypatia carried that spirit. And when she was killed, it wasn't just a person that died. It was a worldview. They skinned her alive and then set her on fire. Think about that. So please spare me your Christian finger wagging and outrage at Islam. You both suck. And your track record for saving history is shit. And it's shit because when you were teenagers as religions on the world stage, you acted like a 15-year-old that thinks it fucking knows everything. Try a little humility, for fuck's sake. Anyway, this is the same pattern that we see again and again, like in the Lucifer story. At some point, knowledge has to be reframed as rebellion, okay? Curiosity becomes a cautionary tale about corruption. Questioning becomes sinful. Why? Because humans are inherently filthy according to this Abrahamic system. These common peasants can't be trusted with knowledge. They're too corrupt. And they won't wield power properly. Not like the power structure that is self-ordained as the divine intermediary between heaven and earth. All of this goes back to the idea that a child doesn't know what's best. So the parents have to guide the child. All Abrahamic power structures operate the same way. They operate under this assumed belief that humans are inherently dirty. That's original sin. So they, the intermediaries to God, know what's best, right? Why do they operate this way? Because that is their understanding of God. Your understanding of God is a reflection of your own consciousness and not a reflection of God's true nature. It's a reflection of your nature, not God's. So centralized religion, like centralized power of any kind, cannot survive if people realize that they can access truth directly. We still see it nowadays. Remember, they say, don't do your own research, trust the science, we have proof of weapons of mass destruction. After 9/11, to question any of these narratives around foreign policy, the Patriot Act, any kind of shit, it was some like lack of patriotism. Once people understand that they can think for themselves, hell, once I understood that I could think for myself, I experienced meaning without permission. I learned that I don't need intermediaries. Once people wake up to that, they are hard to control. They don't simply buy into the bullshit anymore. So naturally, knowledge becomes the enemy of the power structure. And it also becomes the enemy of the people that fell under the spell of the power structure. Those who love the control system because it gives them this false sense of peace and predictability. So Hypatia wasn't killed because she was wrong. She was skinned alive and burned alive because she was free. She was uncontrollable by the system. She made power irrelevant. Remember, People that seek that power are psychic vampires that feed on fear and relevance. And like most vampires, they must be invited in. They can't just walk in. You have to invite them in. So be careful who you invite in. Now, this isn't just some story about ancient history. I mean, it is, but what's more important is that it's a reoccurring pattern, both culturally and psychologically. You know, as scary as the answers are, the adage comes to mind: if you'd like to know who's in charge, look at who you can't criticize. Now ask yourself, is that who you want in charge? And it doesn't have to be a who or a collection of who's. It can be an idea. It can be a philosophy. Is that the system that you want in charge? And any system, and that includes religious systems that punish questioning by humiliating people or through intimidation, equates doubt with some kind of moral failure, and in turn treats certainty as some kind of virtue, is falling right into the same pattern. Those at the helm of the system need your fear to remain relevant in your life. Stop fucking being scared of everything. Hypatia stands as a reminder that dogma is a very dangerous and lazy thing because it fears knowledge. It fears questions. It needs your trust and your laziness to remain in the mind. In the end, Hypatia of Alexandria didn't die defending doctrine. She died defending the right to ask questions that threatened Christian dogma. Anytime the power structure decides that inquiry is dangerous, they make knowledge threatening. And anytime you are offended by questions, scoff at inquiry, and tighten up when opposing views are made, you are under their spell and under their control. I love you. Stay awake. Thank you. If the infinite spark of being has brought you any value, consider supporting the work. And you can do that by checking out Awake and the 90-Day Transformation Journal, both now available on Amazon. The links are in the description. If you want to support this work on a monthly basis, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers that have no locked content yet, just support. You can also swing by the website, check out the merch store, learn more about working with me one-on-one, and as always, the YouTube page has full episodes as well as binaural beats to help you with your practice. So I'll see you next week. Thank you, and I love you.